curious, both of you obviously have clients of, different ethnic backgrounds that you don't share. Do you find that people have ever had a bias towards you or prejudice? I think you even sort of started to mention it, that's like, you probably won't relate to what I'm talking about. Have you ever had someone maybe discriminate against you because they had these preconceived notions about what a psychologist is supposed to look like or be like?
For sure. Well, a lot of people feel like I fit the mold. Like if you're a wonder, like if you were to draw a picture, what would it like? Oh, they sort of say that about me. So people are, they're surprised by the experience. I think more than sort of the way I look, because it's such a different kind of experience in therapy.
Right.
Like I said, being here in LA, we deal with people from islands in the Caribbean, islands in the Pacific. I mean, so many places, and everybody, like I said, has their subtle cultural differences. And to have a place where I can explore that with them is amazing to most people, because that's the beauty of therapy. It's a place, it's like your safe little place. Because the information is confidential, with certain limitations, right, to which we explain at the beginning of the sessions. It creates a space to put that stuff out there, right? And I mean, African Americans deal with constant prejudice and discrimination. Hispanic populations, constant pressure to acculturate and become like a part of who we are and what we are, and losing their culture, right? The Muslim communities, what they're struggling with right now, right? The constant threat to them, right? It's incredible. So I can't think of a single community that's not impacted by this. I personally had to stop watching what happened in France after a while. I could not watch another video of people being hurt. That morning when I heard about it, I thought my head was going to explode. And then I just couldn't turn on the radio. And I think that re-watching of the videos, the shooting videos or any of those, is re-traumatizing. I did a lot of work right after 9/11, and the group I was in did some work with like a local TV station, and we were on a helpline, and people were re-watching the videos, and probably the most helpful thing I could say to them was, turn it off. Because you're really not helping yourself. You're not furthering the cause. You're re-traumatizing your nervous system over and over and over again. And those are the people who come in total panic, who've spent the day watching the shooting videos and then come to therapy overwhelmed. And that a lot of people are doing that now, and they feel like if they care enough or it matters enough, they should be invested in that nitty-gritty. But there's a certain amount that's valuable where you learn from that, and then there's a certain place where you're just crossing the line.
Well,
and like damaging yourself.
Damaging yourself, but then also I wonder desensitizing yourself too. It's like it's almost like now, another shooting, well, turn off the television. It's like every single day there's something that's happening, and so I wonder also, can it cause people to become desensitized and less empathetic, maybe in some form or fashion?
Definitely, or give the notion that no one cares. No one is looking out for us or our cause. This notion of being invalidated again and not having a sense of worth. And what's the point? And so a lot of my work involves finding meaning for folks in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the struggles, in the midst of the terrorist attacks, the shootings. How do you create meaning for yourself? How do you define yourself and operate within this context that we live in? It's important. It's important. You mentioned the trauma. There's this notion of vicarious trauma or parallel trauma, right? Where overexposing yourself over and over again. Studies show that, if a person is constantly exposed to chronic stress, the axons in our brains, the neurons, they're not firing as quickly, they're not as connected as they were before. So you're not as sharp as before. You're having trouble concentrating. You're having difficulty focusing. And your memory problems may occur. So chronic stress has its toll. Being overexposed to certain stimuli and, it has its advantages and disadvantages. There's, I think of maybe like in the athletic realm, right? You have this notion of being in the zone. There's this healthy notion of anxiety, but at a certain point it builds and builds, but just like a bell-shaped curve, it kind of peaks off. And at some point, you're not going to perform at the level that you were before. The same thing is true in communities and can be said of individuals who are exposed to chronic stress. They are not as sharp or can't perform at the level that they once had due to this excessive amount of stress. And it's just like that that water torture technique or something like that, right? Little drip, 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 and eventually it erodes away. It takes its toll.
And I feel like that's what we're seeing with the Black Lives Matter, to your point, where people are saying we're valuable, we want to be validated, and it's that little drip, drip, drip of not being acknowledged, and I think also having to watch these videos every single day.
We talked about anger, and what we see a lot in the community is this notion of people being angry, but we as therapists know the core emotion underneath anger is hurt, right? So it's getting underneath that exhibited behavior and getting to that hurt and finding out why that hurt is taking place and trying to go about healing that hurt. And that takes open discussions, dialogue, building trust, and it won't happen overnight. It takes time. And I think in this age of Instagram, Facebook, we want it now. We want results immediate. And we got to be in it for the long haul.
I wanted to go back quickly before we wrap up to sort of go back to something you said, Dr. Schwimmer, about you being sort of the stereotypical sort of what people would think as a psychologist.
I had to say that, didn't I?
But it's great because it was a great segue. And I wonder, Dr. Lang, when people see you, and you say you're a psychologist, what is the, initial perception you think people might have of you versus a psychologist, perhaps?
That's a great question.
First, they say I'm too young.
Right.
Within the African American community, it's like, oh wow, there's this. Oh, you're a doctor? You did that? I can do that too. I can. Wow, they see me. They see themselves in me, and it validates me on a number of levels. But more importantly, it shows to them that they too can go get their education. They can do something with themselves. So it's reaffirming on both ends. I think we reaffirm each other. They do as much for me as I do for them, and it's a good relationship in that sense. But yeah, because of my hair, I get the notion that I may engage in some it's still legal. I mean,
depending on where
we are, right? Activities. But yeah, so those biases work both ways, good and bad. So.
Yeah, I think it's so amazing the power of stereotypes. Dr. Cheryl Grills, who I think you were probably referring to as your mentor, has a really great TEDx talk about stereotypes and sort of how they're ingrained in us. And she gives this reference about that she asked the question, do cows kill more people or do sharks kill more people in a year? And from, I guess, research, cows kill more people. But the perception is, well, sharks are more deadly, and I'm not going to get in that water because we've been programmed through movies like Jaws and how the media perpetuates stereotypes. And so one of the reasons why I chose to have you both here is because I really wanted to make a point to show that, one, psychologists, therapists, counselors come in all shapes, colors, ethnic backgrounds, genders, but to also break some of the stereotypes and the perceptions that we have. But I also love what you said too, Dr. Schwimmer, of how people might have a perception of you, but then when they experience you, it's like, oh my gosh, my stereotype was wrong. And I can relate to that because my therapist is probably a middle-aged white woman. And I remember when I was looking for a therapist after my mom passed away, I really felt, fine. I was like, I can deal with this. Death happens to everyone, and it's going to be my time soon. And I remember I kept going to the hospital, thinking that there was something wrong with me. And the physician said, well, sometimes when a loved one passes, you can develop psychosomatic symptoms of the
Right.
same thing. And so my mom died of a heart attack, so I kept feeling like there was something wrong with my heart. So I went to see my physician, and she said, yeah, I think you're depressed. And I said, oh no, I'm not depressed, no way. And
Because you're a
Being that
strong
I'm a strong black woman, right? And I remember taking the card and looking at it. She gave me a referral, and I just remember crying in the car because I said, you know what, I do need to talk to someone. So me being me, I do some research, I go online, and I say, who is this person, that she's recommending? And when I saw who it was, I was like, she can't relate to me. She's not an African American. So then I go down the list of people I thought could relate to me. And I remember talking to them over the phone, other black women, and there was no connection. And so then I say, all right, I'll just make the appointment with this lady. And when I tell you, we were connected. And it was that moment where I realized, wow, one, I have my own biases and prejudices and stereotypes about people. But this woman was talk about down for the cause in the black community. Her offices are in the community. And is just a person, and helped me get to the root of my issue, which was not being a strong black woman. It was grieving my mother, something that
Right.
everybody has to deal with, the loss of a loved one. And so I'm really grateful that you two sort of shared those stories about your experiences, because I think that hopefully people will consider getting therapy, and they won't let someone's race, gender, or other prejudice deter them or discourage them.
There's a huge need for mental health services with underserved populations. There's not enough practitioners. We need more therapists, right? More therapists that reflect the culture and know the nuances, so that way people aren't stigmatized or pathologized for having or behaving a certain way. There's many instances I've known where an individual, maybe African American male, may come into a hospital in Brentwood and they are diagnosed with schizophrenia, a powerful diagnosis which can follow them throughout their lives. And they may go to another place and they may be diagnosed with something else, when in reality it may be a lesser form of mental illness. And that person now has this label that follows them. So our job as people of color, as mental health professionals, is to know the context in which people behave and not mislabel them, because it's a huge amount of power in terms of what we do. We have a huge impact on the people that we encounter.
And that is a proven institutional bias.
Right.
Right. Higher levels of diagnosis for
Right.
African American men. Right. So they present with a certain set of symptoms. Side by side, they will be diagnosed with a more serious problem.
Right. Wow. And why do you think that is? Why do you think those labels are placed on African American men at a higher level than maybe other populations?
Prejudice and lack of empathy.
And not understanding
I can't
the
make it
context.
any simpler than that. It just is. It's preconceived notions of who's walking in the door and not looking past that.